I'm very pleased to welcome a good friend of mine and one of the best storytellers there is in the business, Keith Corcoran. So, Keith, how are you?
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. So, Keith, what we're here to talk about, and we're doing this event, as you know, on Wednesday night, and this will be slotted in about how to put together a rambling house storytelling night. And you're sitting in a house now that has been subject to many's a rambling house. I'm not sure if your computer will be
Indeed.
going round.
Can you see it there on video?
Yeah, no, we're you're not quite doing a full 360 Annika
No,
Rice.
no, I won't. No, I won't this month. But I just wanted to show you. There's Central Command.
That is the yes, that's ground zero.
That's the office.
We are talking about a storyteller from a proper rambling house. Well, this is great news. So, I suppose what I asked you was to think about some pointers for our audience about what you would regard as important notes to bear in mind when you're telling a story. So, anything spring to mind there, Keith?
Well, I suppose first of all, we don't. There's only a few very gifted storytellers that pick up things kind of spontaneously, or maybe it's just kind of, they have this genius for it. I certainly aren't one of those people. And I can remember being extremely nervous and anxious leading up to starting to storytell, because it is a sort of, it's something that you just have to take the plunge when you get into it. Now, I'm very lucky in that it was Maura L at the time, because I was working in Ballyshannon and Donegal, and Maura L, who's so involved in the arts here in Donegal, she sat me down one day and she gave me pointers. And I have to say they were extremely helpful. So what I'm going to give you today is KC's from the cottage, Cayley House, KC's top 11 tips. And I have to say about 5 or 6 of these come from Maura L, who basically was going to just basically push you out there, and you've got to do it. Simple as that, You've got to go for it.
Full
So
credit
it's
tomorrow is noted, and so that's the check will be in the post to her.
oh, I suppose the first one I would have to say, especially when I started my own, I did a storytelling residency for a couple of years in Donegal town in the Old Castle Bar, and the first thing that comes to mind to share is learn your stories off by heart, unless you're Tommy Tiernan. Learn your stories off by heart, sentence by sentence, like in a theatre play. And I used to do mine when I was doing the washing up or something. So whatever tedious kind of no thinking tasks about the house, I have my storytelling. I have my stories written out or typed out on a sheet, and that's basically how I, because I realized that the only way that I could counteract nerves when going up and telling a story, especially to a live audience, even if it's a pub audience, which is only about 20 or 30 people, was to have the stories learned off. Because it's a funny thing is that when you then know that the story inside out, it's easier then for you to kind of deviate or interact more with the crowd, because you're so comfortable in your own story. So that's my first tip.
Well, you know something, I'm going to let you flow because otherwise, what happened is people will see when I started to interact with Rab about his pointers. It went on so long. We're just going to have to put it up on YouTube and not include it in the night. So that's a great tip. And the one thing I will say about it is, it it just ensures that you got a proper flow that and you have a confidence, which I think is straight away is what everyone needs. So
Absolutely, which is tip two. That was it. In order to get confidence is if you can learn it. And those tip three then for me would be get somebody. This is Maura Logue's. I would never have come to this myself. Get somebody to introduce you, even if it's the pub, even if it's the guy behind the bar, which I've had to do sometimes when the gaffer wasn't there. get somebody, I don't know why that is, but it seems to be an audience thing, that if somebody gets up and asks for attention, you wait in the wings then to come out and tell a story. Even if it's in a cottage Ceilidh style thing, it's always good if somebody will just say, now we have such and such and such to tell a story. It kind of gathers, because then you're coming on as the storyteller rather than the person who's trying to get cuteness as well. So that'd be step 3.
That's well, the one thing I'd say about that makes a lot of sense, because people, they need to have context. And I mean, even if you watch, say, a Hollywood movie, you've got titles and you've got credits, or before you start to watch Only Fools and Horses, you get to hear that funny song. And it's only at the end of that that your brain is adjusted, and you're ready for it. So I get that. You are a showman, and you should always have a little bit of a drum roll. So that's a great tip.
Well, that's a great idea now, until I get my own theme tune. So moving on to tip 4. Don't utter a single word until you've got your audience attention. Wait till that person leaves down to drink or a cup of tea in the Ceilidh or whatever. Make sure you have, even if it's just for the first couple of moments, make sure you have people's attention before you get into the story. And that's the start of making eye contact. The 5th one, tip number 5, would be just your name. Very quickly, often just who you are and what story you're going to tell. It does sound simple, but it gives it can be easily forgotten, and it phrases the story you're going to tell as well. So tip number 6, project your voice, but don't shout. Project your voice, but don't shout. I learned that, again, it can be out of nervousness, and as you know, sometimes the northern accent, even the Donegal, which is probably the softer version of it, it can be quite loud. You know that if you're out at the Abbey Hotel at 1 o'clock at night, you nearly need a pair of earmuffs to walk through the crowd. And that's so learn to project, but not shout at people. You're doing a story, not a sermon.
That's brilliant. Can I just ask, is there a particular technique you have to do that, or is that a trade secret?
That is a trade secret for now. You'll have to wait until I bring out my own YouTube workshop. So the next one, I forget now. Which tip are we on? Number 6 or 7?
Well, I think a few people would say whatever happened to tip 2, but at this stage, I'd be saying let's just motor on.
Tip 2 was sort of melded in there with tip 1, but motoring on, yeah. Tip 7, this is important as well, and again, this is one from Maura L. Make eye contact. Make eye contact with your audience, and if possible, I know this is not easy. Sometimes in confined spaces, you'll have to sit to tell a story. But if you can stand up, I find it's good, because the energy flows a little bit more. Especially if you're a little bit nervous and it's a new audience. So I would say, and the other thing is kind of move around as well. I think that's helpful. And then another tip that Maura gave me is involve your audience. Befriend your audience. And a simple tip for this is, you can be saying, once upon a time, there was a beautiful couple, Dermot and Grania. Dermot's Grania was renowned throughout the kingdom, kind of like this lady sitting over here, similar to this lady in the corner, Or this, he was said to be as strong as Samson. And then you can say, sort of like the build of this character over here sitting, And again, people laugh at that, but it's also kind of involving your audience in the story as well. So kind of befriending. I have a note here, just kind of befriending parties whenever possible. Yeah, this is one of my own that I kind of learned through the storytelling residencies. I think it's good to start with a short story, a short, funny story. I call them the icebreakers. To go into a Fenian cycle story or Dermot and Grania or thing like that can take 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Now, don't get me wrong, these kind of stories are your feature stories, but I find tip I would give is type of a yarn, a funny short yarn, as we in Donegal, or in the north of Ireland, just a funny short story. And once you get a little bit of laughter, maybe from the audience, if you're lucky, you've kind of hooked your audience. Then you can go into your longer sort of story.
That's brilliant. The one thing I'd say quickly about that is they're fully aware that they're expected to be entertained. And if they are not practicing a bit of laughter within a minute or two, it'll be on their mind as
Yeah.
regards when are we going to start laughing? And then it becomes an issue. So you're absolutely right. In the same way as you need to kind of do a bit of rehearsal in terms of your vocal technique, they need to kind of be getting laughing early on. That's brilliant. Great tip.
So the second final tip I would like to share is try and change the tone of your voice. You know, it can be like, for example, if you want to tell like a ghost story or something, you'll suddenly start, maybe looking around you like that. I'm talking a bit slower. That you went to this house in the middle of the night. The door creaked open, So you're just changing your voice to go with, or if there's a pursuit, for example, and suddenly Dermot found himself pursued by the wild boar through the forests of Carberry and stuff like that there. So you're kind of, so it's just to, again, this is all about knowing your story as well. When you know your story more, you can kind of uh, change change your pitch of voice and stuff as well. And again, I'm learning all the time about this. I was very lucky to have that storytelling residency because it was almost like a 3 months constant out 2-3 nights a week, and I found it was you're basically thrown into the deep end and learning to swim. So that's what I would learn to you. What I've found is, yeah, just use your voice to match the kind of emotions you're trying to convey in the story as well. And last but not least, and there was a guy, there was I was told this by a guy called Duke Stroud. Duke Stroud used to appear in a lot of westerns. In fact, he appeared. You might be able to get his character. He appeared in Top Gun. He was the officer on board the ship that was always shouting to the guys when they were doing crazy maneuvers on Tom Cruise and his partner. Do you remember? It was the Top Gun movie anyway. So Duke Stroud, he started off as his career doing westerns in Hollywood. And then one of his big parts then was he was the cantankerous officer on board the
Yeah, he say the great
aircraft carrier.
your body's writing checks, your ego can't check or cash. That was it. There was some line along those, something like that. And of course, Tom did his great little bit of, the cheeks went up a bit.
That's right. That's right. That's Duke. So I mean, I didn't know he appeared in Donegal town at one of the storytelling nights, and I was telling a ghost story. It's a famous ghost story from Barnesmore Gap. So he was listening, and in fairness, I'm so glad he didn't mention who he was before I started, or I probably wouldn't been able to do it with nerves. But he came up to me afterwards and he said, that story about the Phantom Hitchhiker. He said, that's a really good story. But he said, when you finish the story, he says, you quickly finish, say if it's a cliffhanger or a thrilling story, because I was finishing with, and there he was sitting in the back seat of the car, staring at her. And you see as the story goes, and he goes, don't say anything after that. That's your punchline to finish the story. And that was only kind of like, I suppose, a nervous habit that I felt I had to compensate. That's where your silence comes in as well there, John. I know you mentioned it to me, one of Rab's key points. Use silence as well. Don't be afraid just to cut the story, especially if you want to create a bit of a thrill or a suspense in your audience.
Well, I hope I got a suitable silence there before I said bravo, sir, bravo. That's beautiful. You know, it's a very binary thing, storytelling, because basically you're talking or you've got silence. And you're absolutely right. We need to be focusing on the other tool from that very small box and use it well, especially when there's something scary or there's something poignant. And, you know, there's a time for the laughter and let the silence be extinguished, but you're absolutely right. So he was making an awful lot of sense. I think that line was, your ego's writing checks your body can't cash. That was it. And, you know, again, one of the killer lines. He did people realize by the end of the night who he was, or was it was all about you, and he was taken out the back and removed?
No, it didn't. People, you know, a guy like that, there was no real ego with him. It was just that I was introduced to him, but it's through his party, and he just very kindly, you know, from looking, because he trains actors now. That's his role, and I just thought it was very kind of him to just share his thoughts of when I was up doing storytelling. I suppose storytelling is a performance, you know, in a way. I know that Eddie Lenihan would say, he would say, oh, you know, if it turns into performance, a bit of a cod, or, you know, but no, that's not quite true, because even anybody, like I remember there's a great storyteller in our area called Hugh Gallagher, Hugh the Book, and Hugh was telling stories into his 70s. And there's a story about him going to a wedding in the local area. Now, he would have been in his late 70s at this stage. And there was a crowd of young people in their teens and 20s, maybe 20 of them in the foyer of the Abbey. And Q was sitting on the couch and they were all circled around him. And all he was doing was telling one yarn after another. But he was a great mimicker of people, and they were all local stories. So that was, you can't say that that guy wasn't a performer to hold the attention of a generation 50 years younger than him. So, you know, it is, I suppose what he's trying to say, don't leave out the fakery. Don't have to dress up with the waistcoat and the chain and in my father's time and the goatee to shirt. And, you know, I know certain guys like Kelly did that very, very well. But I think that you can combine performance and be authentic at the same time.
Be yourself, I suppose.
Fine. Yeah, fine. I suppose everybody, everybody has their own style, and I think there's only one way I would give a final piece of advice to people. The only way you'll find it out is by start telling stories.
That's brilliant. And I don't know if you're. I heard some sound effect. I thought you were going to just go blank there, and that was you dropping the mic. But I think that's great advice.
That was a tractor. Just that was a high-speed tractor going out the road, John.
I knew tractors would kind of encroach the show at some stage. Hugh's trick was to actually make it engage his audience, because they were always on the listen for someone who they'd know about. You know, when you're mimicking straight away, and then they might use that material later on to tell the girlfriend or something like that. So that's a great. You're right. It's a hook, but it's a hook that they can identify with, rather than talking about you know, the man on the moon. So that is brilliant. And all I'm going to say is, I know you're a busy man, so unless there's any final words, I think the Rambling House Storytelling Evening is very grateful for your sage and indeed onion advice as always, Keith. So thank you very much.
Very welcome, John, and keep up the good work.